Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Cybersecurity in the Boardroom, How to Get Executive Buy-in and Drive Action. So I'm Edwin Bowers, Cybersecurity Sales Leader at SmartTech, and I'm going to be moderating the session. So it'll be a 45-minute webinar with about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So feel free to ask as many questions as you like throughout using the Q&A or the chat function below. And if it's not addressed during the webinar, we'll cover it at the end. So this topic, it's not a new one, but it's becoming more important because the frequency and negative impact of cybersecurity incidents on organizations continue to rise, undermining the confidence of the board and executives in their company's cybersecurity strategy. So business resilience, trust, and personal accountability are at stake. Add increased regulation to this, it makes it clear that the boardroom needs to understand and act on cyber risk. So I'm delighted to be joined by two leaders who sit at the intersection of these issues every day. CEOs of cutting-edge cybersecurity companies who regularly advise boards and executives on how to protect their organizations and drive cyber resilience. So they share what resonates with boards, where the sticking points are, and what practical steps can be taken to get buy-in and drive action. So firstly, Raluca Saceanu is the CEO of SmartTech 247, a global leader in managed detection and response. She regularly advises CISO, CEOs, and boards on building cyber resilience and embedding security into business strategy. Raluca is also a passionate advocate for diversity in technology and leadership, championing exclusion as a driver of innovation and better decision-making. And we also have Danny Jenkins, who is the CEO and co-founder of ThreatLocker, a global leader in zero trust endpoint security, a lifelong technologist and entrepreneur. Danny is known for his hands-on approach to helping organizations strengthen their defenses and simplify security management. So we're delighted to have this much experience talking about this topic. So Raluca, let's start with you. To set the scene, what kind of threats or risks are you seeing that cause concern for boards and CEOs at the moment?
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you, Danny, as well, for joining our webinar today. What we're seeing from across our intelligence centers is that the threat landscape has become more targeted, more complex, and I think a good example is the first big trend is around supply chain attacks. Threat actors are now compromising vendors and partners and managed service providers to cause chaos and disruption. A great example of that is the recent attack that disrupted numerous airports across Europe. And of course, the second area that everyone talks about is, of course, AI, AI-driven threats. And we are seeing a lot of threat actors at the moment using AI extensively to create, good phishing campaigns, deep fakes. And at the same time, many organizations are also adopting AI tools internally without always understanding the security implications. So you could say that the attack surface is expanding on both sides. To even get a little bit more specific, we are seeing a significant spike in identity-related attacks. As a matter of fact, in our security operations center, the centers across the world, we're seeing about 60% of incidents that we investigate are identity-related incidents. And of course, we can't ignore as well the geopolitical dimension, which has massively influenced the cyber landscape. And unfortunately, cyber activity has become a key extension of global conflict. We've seen numerous examples in the last 3 years alone. And, I think this is impacting national security as well as creating a lot of spillover risks that reach deep into the private sector as well. But I'm curious to hear Danny's perspectives as well.
Yeah, so essentially a little bit much of the same. AI, big use. We're seeing one of the things we've noticed is the number of attackers has rapidly increased. If you wanted to write a scam email a few years ago, you had to at least speak good English. And a lot of the scam emails you could very easily see they were poorly written, bad grammar. Now AI is allowing people to write emails, and you can go into even something like ChatGPT and say, write me an email from the HR department asking everyone to confirm their social security number. And they'll send that out, and it's well written, it looks professional, and people are more likely to fall for it. But also more terrifying is AI-driven malware, because if we go back 5 years ago, 3 years ago even, you had to be a developer, you had to be smart to write malware. And the amount of people write malware was in the hundreds and thousands, if not millions. But now potentially 4 billion people can gain access to a computer and write malware. And every time they create it, it's completely unique. So it's incredibly difficult to track and block, because if you ask ChatGPT to write you a piece of software that finds where you store your files and uploads them to Google Cloud for backup purposes, that can be used as malware as well. And we're really seeing this big increase in trend in this. But also, I mean, more ransomware attacks, more data theft on ransomware is definitely a big part of it too.
Excellent. And look, over the past year, we've seen CEOs and boards come under much greater scrutiny when it comes to cybersecurity, not just after incidents, but how they govern and oversee cyber risk in the first place. Marks and Spencer's is a great recent example of this. So, Raluca, why has cybersecurity become such a central boardroom issue, and what are the key implications for CEOs and directors today?
This is a really interesting one, because if you look at this industry for the last maybe 10 years, we can now see that cybersecurity is directly impacting a company's profitability, valuation, reputation, and even, executive accountability. You know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even a CEO could delegate security entirely to IT or their own security team, but that model doesn't really work anymore. And the reality is that today's threats are very strategic and very connected as well. And one cyber attack, like we've seen recently, can affect an entire supply chain. And then that impacts on customer trust and investor confidence and even a company's profitability. So when I sit down with boards and managers, we talk about their cybersecurity challenges, there's usually like three key questions that they ask their CISOs. And by the way, this is regardless of the industry or the company size. Number one, if one of our vendor gets hacked, are we still operational? What happens? So you can really see that boards care about the operational resilience. We're seeing that a lot of the biggest incidents today are coming from third parties, and often that happens because there's a lack of maybe governance, but sometimes it's also out of organization's control as well. So it really is about resilience and readiness. And interestingly, boards and CEOs now are shifting the question from, are we secure, to are we ready for a cyber attack? The second question, and this is a complex one to even answer for a lot of organizations, is how secure is our data? Like, how confident are we that in the event of an incident, the data won't be exfiltrated? And again, it's not an easy question to answer. And it's why data security has gotten a lot of attention lately. And thirdly, interestingly enough, it could be a very simple topic and a simple question, but boards are asking about the company's ability to defend against phishing, for example, whether employees can actually spot and avoid social engineering attempts, how quickly can they detect and contain it. And they're asking this because phishing does remain the number one entry point for a lot of incidents, and it is a huge problem for a lot of executives. So it's these kind of questions that capture what boards really care about. They care about continuity, they care about trust, they care about the business's resilience to keep going, and they're recognizing now that it's a real business risk. And what I would say for CEOs, maybe my advice would be that, the same way that they review a profit and loss statement and they understand the financial health of the company, they should be in a position to digest the cyber posture assessment as well. They should be in a position to understand the company's digital health, because not doing that is a huge risk for the business, and it has to be treated as a performance metric and not a technical report.
Absolutely. And Danny, have you seen the changes in the boardroom? Are boards getting more involved with cybersecurity?
I think yes. I think in some respects not enough, and in some respects in the wrong area. One of the big concerns I see with the board is quite often they're responding to specific attacks. So if SolarWinds gets hacked, they want to know how are we dealing with this. If the, when the MGM was hacked, well, could we be attacked by that exact hack? What I'm not seeing enough of, definitely seeing concern, but what I'm not seeing enough of is the right questions of what framework are we following? What controls have we put in place? And quite often, as a CEO of a company myself as well, my default position when someone wants to spend money is no. Like, I do not want you to spend money. I do not want you to fix something. And obviously, as a security vendor, I tend to go again the opposite with that. But everything else, generally, someone comes in and says, "We want this new thing, and it's going to help us with this," and I say no, and they have to prove otherwise. One of the challenges we're seeing quite often is the board wants to. They're scared about cybersecurity. They're scared about whatever's in the news that day. When the IT or the CISO or the security team asks for something, they ask the team, "Well, what does this give me?" And the team's really bad at communicating. So there's this big challenge with, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm really scared, but I'm also not doing anything to stop it. I'm not doing enough to stop it. So we're seeing more concern, more accountability. And of course, we're starting to see potential criminal charges brought against security officers who didn't take the necessary steps. But I also think there's complete scramble and lack of lack of coordination on that. And like you mentioned about the financial statement, as a CEO, every CEO needs to understand a profit and loss statement. Every CEO does not understand a cybersecurity framework, and that is a big problem, and that needs to be addressed.
So you mentioned that communication is usually pretty bad. How have you seen good communication? I know personally I've seen some really good analogies, particularly with sports teams. Are there anything that you've seen that's communicated well that the board resonates with?
So I think from a board point of view, giving a solution and to a problem with real life examples and compliance alignment. Unfortunately, compliance is one of those ones that isn't the most important thing, because compliance helps you drive towards security, but it doesn't necessarily make you secure. So, but if you can go to a board and you can say, we should be blocking untrusted software by default, and this is examples of where untrusted software weren't blocked, and this is what happened as a result of it, and these are all of the compliance standards that recommend we do this, that seems to resonate with the board. What tends to happen is you'll get an IT professional come in and say, "Oh, we want to stop this because it's going to stop people downloading games and it's going to give us more control." And they're not really giving real examples and real risks to the board. So it becomes a bit of a problem. If people can focus on, these are real life examples, and this is what compliance frameworks say, you're more likely to get funding from the board and support of the board. And it's not always funding. When it comes to security, sometimes it's about upsetting people too, because you took away their game or you took away their coupon clipper, or so you're not just looking for financial support, but you're looking for business support as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, look, earlier in June, criminals broke into a third-party platform used by Qantas contact center, and they stole personal data of about 6 million customers. The Qantas board cut short-term bonuses for senior leaders by 15%, and the CEO alone lost about $250,000 from their bonus. So if that risk doesn't scare boards and scare them, then I'm not sure what will. But we're taught in security sales not to sell on FUD, on pure uncertainty and doubt. But do you think from an IT leader internally that they should use that fear with their boards to get funding?
I don't think you should sell on fear, but I think you should sell. Look, cybersecurity, you'll often hear headlines that say this was a major sophisticated attack. It wasn't a sophisticated attack at all. Someone wrote a piece of malware, it wasn't detected. Somebody got a backdoor into a system, or there was a VPN not patched, and somebody got in. Uh, so I think you can go in and you can say these are real risks. And look, as a CEO, if my security professionals come into me, and yes, I'm a security driven CEO, but my finance guys come into me and they say, we need to implement this control. This is a real risk if we don't do this. I'm going to say, what's the risk? Tell me what the cost is. Tell me what the impact is. And I'm not going to say, no, I don't hire finance people to give me advice and then ignore it. And the same with security. But the security just needs to go in and say, this is a real risk. This is the control we can put in place to stop it. This is what it's going to cost, and this is what the impact it's going to have to the business, most CEOs and most boards will say, I completely accept that. Let's do that. But if you go in and give ambiguity and you start saying the world's burning down, we've got to spend more money, and we've got, without a plan, you're more likely to be turned away.
Yeah.
I think if I can just add to that, Edwin, it's back to what I was saying earlier, that the questions are now not really what happened, but, or maybe not only what happened, why did it happen like that? And who knew what, and what did they do about it, right? Because we've seen cases where security people go to their leadership team and tell them, these are the metrics, this is what's happening, and then this gets ignored, for sure. And then we've also seen cases where they simply cannot communicate the right metrics, like exactly like Danny just mentioned. So we need to understand that, and look, the news are doing the job for us at the moment. Everyone knows that this is scary and this can impact the company's reputation. But security leaders need to understand how to convey those metrics in a way that they get buy-in, and that they are understand it by the board and the CEOs. And quantifying the risk is really important, explaining what that risk is, and assigning a dollar value to it as well, if you want to get one step further. Some organizations are very financial focused, and they almost act like a financial institution, even if they're not. So in that case, you need to be able to speak their language really well. This is the risk, this is what it means, and this is what could happen if we don't act now. But that clarity and communication is really, really important. And you know what? If you're a security leader, you're not alone in this. You don't have to do it on your own. That's why you've got your security partners and your vendors that can help you with this stuff, right? You can get an independent valuation. You've got your trusted vendors and trusted partners that give you those metrics. How do you take those and then convey them to the leadership team? That's the question.
Absolutely. And Raluca, Danny talked about compliance moving the needle, and you've talked about accountability and how cybersecurity has become a leadership issue. So we've also seen regulators, especially the SEC in the US, start to treat cyber incidents as a matter of personal accountability for CEOs and boards. So for example, the SEC's recent rules now require companies to disclose material cyber incidents within 4 business days. And they're also holding individual executives responsible for failures in governance or transparency. So how do you see these kind of regulation change the way boards and CEOs approach cybersecurity? And what does that mean practically for leaders here in terms of how they prepare and how they respond?
Yeah, and look, it's not just the SEC. NIST 2 is also introducing a personal accountability clause as well. And it's exactly what I mentioned earlier. It doesn't mean that the CEOs need to become technical experts, but it's about showing that cybersecurity is being managed with the same rigor as financial and operational risk. So in certain cases, for some boards, that means one board member needs to have cyber expertise. That's also questionable in certain cases. I've seen, some individuals think cyber expertise is one thing, and others think it's just a little course that they do. I think an understanding of the risk is really important. The board also needs to receive regular structured updates. For CEOs, they really need to understand that they have to own the narrative. And of course, they need to get help from the CISOs here. So being able to explain to investors and regulators and customers, what steps are you taking to protect the organization, to protect their data, and to respond as well. So it has become a lot about trust and accountability. I think given the nature of, the world right now, where even the smallest breach can get on the news, and the information spreads so fast, and social media will be the first to kill you instantly when something happens. I think it's important that everybody takes it seriously and treats it as an operational risk, because again, when something happens, the shareholders, they don't really want to know what went wrong. They just want to know, was leadership prepared? They're going to put leadership in the spotlight, and what could we have done better to avoid this? Because the reality is attacks will happen, right? But if you're not able to show concrete examples of what you have done to prevent it as much as possible, prevent the blast radius, then you're going to be put in the spotlight, of course.
I think that's a real point, actually, making sure that you're not just stopping attacks, but you're stopping the damage to those attacks. And these new SEC regulations, they're requiring companies to report breaches within 4 days. The problem is there's two types of, again, the regulation says material breaches. If you're a company with 50,000 employees, someone's email getting compromised because they got phished is almost inevitable on multiple days. Some larger companies have taken the approach of, we're actually going to report every single breach in bulk, and it's just going to become white noise. So if you'll go onto some of the larger companies' filings, and you'll just see we had 49 incidences reported of phishing successfully getting access to someone's email account. Now, that doesn't mean it's massive damage. And the other problem I see is quite often the board is often pushing the security person to say, so this makes us secure. And that's not a statement that should ever be answered with yes. The statement should be, this solves some of our problems, and then I'm going to work on our next worst problem and come back to you on that. And if you put yourself into a corner where you're being told, we're now secure, you essentially lose, because next time you go back, but you came back to me 2 months ago and you asked for this, and you're saying I need this as well. The reality is, we do 170 point check on endpoints, 170 different control checks, and they're not all of the control checks that you should be doing. And quite often when you're going to the board, you're trying to deal with 1, 2, 3, 5 of those, and the board has to realize that there's going to be more things. And what I need is a team that's constantly striving to make us more secure than we were the day before, without impacting the business in a negative way.
Absolutely. So Danny, if there's not much technical knowledge at the board, should CISOs have a seat at the boardroom table?
I think so. Most board C-suite do present to the board at least. CISOs probably should have a seat, if not anything else but an observer seat. But the other problem is having technical knowledge at the board, I don't think is necessarily helpful. And if you look at how most board meetings run, they run once a quarter, everyone sits in a room for 4 hours, and there'll be a bunch of questions asked, mostly around the financial projections, performance, what's happening with the budget, and you might get 15, 20 minutes on risk and cybersecurity. So I think having the CISO present to the board is a good idea. I also think the board demanding things like an external pen test is a really good idea, because then they can say, we're going to appoint a pen tester and we're going to into the company, and it's going to come back and give us your weaknesses so we can ask you about that. And if the CISO knows that's happening, if the security team, the IT team know that's happening, they're more likely to strive for better security.
Absolutely. And Raluca, based on your experience working with CISOs and CIOs across different industries, how can leaders best prepare for the tough questions they get from the boards and regulators? What do you see as the most effective CEOs and boards do differently when it comes to cyber readiness?
Well, I think, and this is something Danny mentioned earlier, I do think it's important to bring the CISO or the CIO to the strategy table. And I don't think we need to treat it as a technical item at all. At the end of the day, it does have to be quite practical. And I like what you said earlier, Danny, cybersecurity attacks and incidents, they're not that sophisticated. That they're just not, right? They get in through a phishing and they spread laterally, they exploit the vulnerability, and they take advantage of you having a visibility gap. It's not that sophisticated. So we do need to bring the right metrics to the table as well. Go beyond compliance checklists, see metrics on zero trust, awareness, compliance, non-compliance. How fast are we patching? And I know this is probably too technical, but how fast are we patching high and critical vulnerabilities that are exploitable in our environment? How fast are we actually responding to an incident? Not knowing the answers to those questions will kill you if you are presenting to the board. So it's really important to get those basic questions right, but also get a holistic view of cyber risk. understanding what the risk is in the organization, get an independent evaluation as well, and those are pretty helpful. And I think we mentioned this earlier, and I can't emphasize it enough. Try and anchor your program to a recognized framework. That's the best way to have a plan, at least a way to measure it. By the way, it can be your own, right? You don't have to necessarily follow every single step of the framework. It can be your own if you want to. It can be adapted to your business, but at least have a score and a metric that you're keeping an eye on and you're measuring regularly so that you can understand whether you're making improvements or not in your environment. And then I mentioned earlier on, quantifying cyber risk is so important. It's not enough to just say we have a high risk in our environment because of this, and the impact is that. What is the quantification of that? What's the dollar value of that? That's something that can drive a conversation. And I think one of the most important lessons as well is keep an open mind and keep learning, right? Learn from your peers, learn from your vendors, because cyber threats evolve constantly. And it's really important for both boards, CEOs, and CISOs to keep learning. That's why we have all these conferences, all these webinars, all these sessions. You can rely as much as you can on your vendors, but it's really important to keep learning and understand how you can bring some of the lessons that you're learning from other attacks into your organization. So, for example, one of the things we do as an MDR provider is we send out threat intel reports and cyber alerts. And in the past, a lot of our customers would say, well, these are not customized to my organization. Why do I care about an attack that happened on Jaguar? And I always say, you have to learn from these attacks. Even if you don't have the particular vulnerability or the SAP vulnerability or whatever vulnerability is being exploited, there's always something to learn from these attacks. Not knowing is what will drive ignorance at the end of the day. So constantly learning is an important lesson.
It's interesting you say that because we have this, we call it defense against configuration. It's a report that goes out to customers and it does that 170-point check. And we have some customers coming, I want to ignore and tell it not to test this.
Yeah.
We're saying, but why? And they're saying, because I don't think it's relevant to me. It's like, it's a risk, but I'm willing to accept the risk. Well, accept the risk, but don't pretend it's not there. And they literally
Absolutely.
wanted it removed from the report. And we're saying, no, when you need to know, it's okay to have risks, but you need to know
Exactly.
what the risk is and what the damage of the risk. And if we think about the financial world, and boards often understand the financial world, you might put a control that in the event that you transfer more than $100,000, you have to send a smaller amount to the recipient, verify with them they received it, and then send the larger amount. But if you're sending $10,000, it's not worth the extra work that it takes to do those 100 payments a week. So we're just going to send the $10,000 without extra verification. And we know that we get it wrong, we lose $10,000. But if we try to validate 100 transactions, it's going to cost us $10,000 more. So we're willing to take the risk. The same applies to cybersecurity. You should know what the risks are in your environment. And one of the things that I always find interesting is investors and boards often demand audited financials. So,
Mhm.
especially if you're public, obviously you definitely have to have them. But if you're even a non-public company, we have to audit our financials. Our investors demand it. So we have an auditor come in. They do audit the financials. We pay a lot of money, and then we get audited financials. I feel like the board should be demanding the same. Get me an external audit of our cybersecurity posture, and you're probably spending a similar amount of money that you do on your audited financials for your audited cybersecurity. That's more likely to put you out of business, a cyber attack, than someone stealing $10,000.
So why are the boards not demanding it?
Boards existed before, this is my opinion, uh, 20 years ago, IT security was an IT issue. Malware was not shutting down businesses. Ransomware didn't exist. Phishing, spear phishing with transfer of money never existed, didn't exist. And in 20 years' time, we've had to go from a board that's never had to think about this, or boards of every company in the world, to suddenly this should be the top of your mind. That's why they're not asking for it. And The reality is we hear a lot in the news, and you made a point about the news selling this for us and helping us, but it's about big companies. It's about MGM. And even if you're a 500 employee or a 1,000 employee company, that's never going to happen to me. Who's targeting me? I make pet food. I'm a small healthcare clinic, and they don't know because they're not the ones that the news is printing about. For every large cyber attack, there's 1,000 smaller ones that you don't even hear about. And that's probably one of the bigger reasons.
And I guess
Absolutely.
there's a role that the regulations will play as well, and they are starting to demand, I mean that lightly, more metrics and more evaluations to be conducted. And at some stage, there will be a requirement to have an independent evaluation presented to the board or signed off by the CEO, right? I think that's a relevant requirement to have. The same way, like you said, with audited accounts have to be signed off by the CEO. I know because I've signed a lot of them. The same way you have to sign off on cyber reports.
And I think part of the challenge you have is, as a CEO, I know we get audited accounts and we trust our auditors, and we
Absolutely.
review the accounts, but there's hundreds of thousands of transactions going in, and we're summarizing. We're saying, okay, everything looks right here. From a security point of view, having that signed off by the CEO makes them ask the questions: Do I trust the person?
Exactly.
And that's what they need to do. They need to go, well, if I don't trust my auditor or my reviewer or my assessor or whatever the correct term is, then I shouldn't be signing this off. And
Exactly.
that has to change where companies are definitely more conscious than they have been because we've seen over and over again companies fail because of cybersecurity attacks. Companies spend more time concerned about what happens if my building burns down than they do what about cyber attack. And the probability of you going out of business from your building burning down is substantially lower than a cyber attack taking you out of business.
Well, even like I had an interesting conversation with a prospect the other day, and they're very worried about ransomware recovery, and they want to spend a lot of money on ransomware recovery. But the reality is that if they get hit with ransomware or non-ransomware, that data will be exfiltrated. So they're going to spend a lot of money on maybe paying the ransom or paying the fines or dealing with the reputational risk. So why are we focusing on ransomware recovery and spending a lot of money on that? Because there's a million other things that could happen and hurt us. Whereas why are we not focusing on maybe preventing that ransomware or preventing the blast radius to spin out of control?
I think that comes back down to the point that these cyber attacks are reported as sophisticated cyber attacks, making it thinkable that I can't do anything to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I have to figure out
Exactly.
how to recover from it. And if we can get out of this mentality where 99.99% of cyber attacks are not sophisticated, they just require you to put the basic controls in place, then we can actually stop the ransomware to begin with. And companies and the media has to stop reporting this word sophisticated.
Definitely. Um, so Danny, you've mentioned uh, obviously from a ThreatLocker perspective, you're obviously helping CISOs obtain security funding from boards. So how do you go through that process to give them the ammo that they need to make boards sign off on that decision?
And every board is different, so it depends on the person we're working with. Quite often, we'll actually do audits for them. We'll do reviews, and we'll show them this report. We'll give them a nice glossy, PDF, or they can print it, and it will show this is the risks that you have. This is where you align where you should be, and this is where you are. These are the compliance frameworks, and a lot of companies don't have to comply with any framework, but knowing that there's 15 frameworks that say you should be doing this and only one of them saying you don't need to do it means you probably should be listening to the 15 frameworks. They didn't make it up, all of them together. Showing them real risks, number of ransomware attacks, number of cyber attacks that happen to this is really, really one of the easiest ways. Other ways is showing them what they've got. So having nice reports of, hey, our environment has ran like this for 5 years. And while we haven't been shut down by ransomware, let me show you some of the consequences that we know of. We have a coupon clipper in 14% of our employees' browsers, they can see all of the passwords for every website they went to and was made in China. And I don't like selling in fear, but that one does tend to bring realization, because they're now gone from saying, well, people don't download coupon clippers made in China, to, oh, they actually do. People aren't thinking about what they do. So what can we do to stop this? And so reports are really, really useful. Data, current failures in your system, and highlighting those is really useful. Again, it's awkward for CISOs because they have to go in, especially if they've been in their job for a long time. New CISOs are great for boards because they want to come in and show how bad you are so they can fix it. The problem is the guy that's been in the job for 5 years doesn't want to come in after 5 years saying, we're in a sinking ship here, we need to do something. And that makes it even harder. So, but having those reports is really, really helpful. And just communicating compliance, I feel, is one of the easiest, because even if they don't have to comply with it, just knowing that this is what CIS, NIST, Essential 8, UK Cyber Essentials all recommend, and we're not doing it, means we're driving without seatbelt.
Absolutely. And then Raluca, from your experience, what if you were to go and coach boards on what to ask CISOs from the other angle, what would you coach them and advise boards that they should be questioning their security teams on?
Well, I think I've mentioned quite a few of them already, but they really need to ask, for more metrics. They need to ask questions around cyber risk. They need to see, are the cyber risks quantified? Are they quantified in terms of financial, operational? I'm a big believer in the independent validation, the getting a report on your general posture, maybe mapping that against NIST is a great way to showcase this is where we're strong, this is where we're weak, and this is what we're working on. So I do think that more and more boards are asking for those kind of reports. And maybe just to bring it down into more kind of practical examples of how we're helping our customers report to boards. And a lot of our customers are taking our reports because we do these QBRs with them. And we report on the incidents that we've managed for them, what type of incidents they were, certain scores. So the kind of metrics that go back to the board are, this is how fast we're responding to incidents. This is our benchmark against, everybody loves a good benchmark, right? Everybody wants to know how they're doing in comparison to their peers. This is where we are in comparison to our peers. This is our fish prone score, or this is how many employees are clicking. It sounds too detailed, but we are seeing executive teams and boards being a little bit more interested in those details. But the high level ones are risk, quantified risk, incident response time, even security coverage. And, they will always see something in the news and they go and ask, Jaguar got hacked, are we at risk? What happened there? So you have to be in a position to explain what happened, how you sort of compare to an attack like that, or how your controls compare to their weak points, and then being able to explain what you're doing on a quarterly basis, for example, to increase that risk.
Yep, definitely. We might go to some Q&A now. So if anyone's got any questions, please put them in the chat. There's already a few in there now. But because I'm moderating, I'm going to jump in with a question first for you, Danny. So, look, today your brand is really well known. I can't listen to an episode of Darknet Diaries without hearing about ThreatLocker. But you also have referenceability with some of the biggest brands in the world. So, how has your message to potential customers, executive teams, changed from when ThreatLocker was a startup to where you are today? Do you need a different message depending on where your company's at if you're a startup as opposed to a more established enterprise security vendor?
I don't think our message has changed. I think what because I was actually reading our mission statement from our original business plan, and it's pretty much exactly the same now. We tweak some of the grammar and the flow of it. I think what's changed is the pushback on it. So when ThreatLocker started, the idea of implementing a zero trust controls was a complete negative. And every single company that we onboarded thought this was going to be a complete disaster and it was going to be impossible. And at first, one of the things we still do is extended trials to make sure you understand what you're buying and you can test it in your environment. When we first started, though, everyone didn't believe it. Now, with a 99.96% monthly renewal rate and a huge amount of customers talking about us, it's not as hard to sell that message because, well, ransomware's got worse, zero trust has become more popular, but also people are saying, no, ThreatLocker's done this, it's been much easier. So the message hasn't changed. What we're saying you should do is consistently the same. The cyber attacks that were being blocked back then are still being blocked by now with the same principles. What's changed is it's getting easier and easier the more we onboard, the more customers we go to stop getting resistance and pushback.
Fantastic. Thank you. So some of the other questions. So what are the most common misconceptions boards have about cyber risk and how can they be addressed? Raluca, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think one of them is something we mentioned earlier, that I see a lot of organizations taking cybersecurity for granted and saying, no, this won't, why would this happen? I hear this question all the time. Why would it happen to us? So that's definitely something that needs to change. The other one is that it's just the CISO's responsibility. They are somehow magicians that have to make it happen and have to make it work, and that's not correct. I do think that a lot of people in the organization hold responsibility, and back to what we were saying earlier, it's the CEO's accountability to make sure that this gets implemented correctly. And the other one is something that we've already mentioned, that attacks are just so sophisticated. They're not. They're not sophisticated at all. With good hygiene in place, a good security culture, and good visibility, you can prevent quite a lot of attacks.
And a question for you, Danny. When presenting to the board, how can CISOs frame accountability so cybersecurity isn't viewed solely as an IT issue, but as a shared business risk ownership across the C-suite?
Um, I think you mentioned earlier on about bonuses being cut because of a cyber attack. I don't think anyone on a C-suite is scared about their bonus being cut because they get attacked. And I think if they do, they shouldn't be on the C-suite. I mean, people on the C-suite should genuinely care about the impact of the business. And this idea of punishment as a remedy to make people behave it's not. It doesn't work. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be getting paid bonuses, but I think when you're a CISO and you're talking to the board, I think everyone on your board should be smart. So you need to just say these are the real risks. We have to fix this, and this is the solutions to fix it. And I don't think the board's holding themselves accountable or not holding themselves accountable, because I've never met a board member who's willing to vote against something that's going to be right for the business that's presented. I think accountability, the one thing that the board always struggles with is, can I trust the person that's telling me this data? And I think that's the reality. It's not so much about board accountability or business accountability. It's, I need to know that we've done the right things. I hope there's not a single person that doesn't think it's a whole business accountability issue. And I don't think a CISO needs to say anything. I think they just need to focus on, this is what we need to do to improve and secure our business. And I feel like as a board member, if your CISO comes into you in a quarter and says, we're doing great, we've done everything perfect, we've got no bad things we found in our environment that we proved on this quarter, it's probably not a good CISO, because there's no such thing as you found nothing in your environment. And I'm not talking about an attack, just a configuration. You found, oh, we had 15 incidences where someone didn't go through training. We had 12 incidents where screensaver lock policies weren't in place. We had 14 machines that had elevation policies for command prompt. And you should have those lists of things, and you should say, this is what we did to fix them. And the next quarter, you should have bad things. So I think making sure that you're showing that we're failing and we're fixing those failures is really important. That'll build trust with the board. And I think just explaining that this is a business issue, and of course, use cases are important, but I think they know it's a business issue, otherwise they probably shouldn't be on the board.
Absolutely. Two more questions here. So, boards often understand return on investment, but struggle with risk avoided as a value metric. So, what's the most effective way you've seen CISOs quantify security ROI in board discussions? Either of you can answer that.
I'll go first. It's actually a conversation I had yesterday with a customer who's implementing a new the risk quantification structure, and they are planning to assign a number to every single cyber risk in their environment, and it's very similarly to how insurance companies do it, assign the dollar value to, if that, what is the impact of that risk? That impact is $10 million or $20 million. And then leaving that number in the risk register. And that's one way that people view return on investment. How much have we saved and how much have we avoided in terms of cost? I do think that cybersecurity is one of those areas that is pretty difficult to completely showcase as a return on investment. And there's a lot of reports out there from Forrester and Gartner teaching you how to do it properly. So certain companies choose to use we avoided this much in terms of risk, or we saved this much in terms of not having it to do it ourselves because we outsource it. And then of course right now with the idea of platformization, there's a lot of security technologies that are coming in and helping customers avoid further costs by having synergies between these technologies. That's another way that you can show, I guess, cost savings or return on investment.
Danny, do you have that ROI conversation much with customers?
Okay, so I think that there's two. I'll tell you my position as a CEO of this company. There's two things I'm thinking about, and let's talk about negotiating a contract with a customer because it's a similar scenario. There's a there's a limitation of liability in every single contract. Somebody comes to me and says they want to change this to this. The first question I ask myself every single time is the risk of this going wrong, not the probability, because the probability should be 0.001%. But if the risk of this going wrong going to cause substantial damage and potentially even close our company, or is the risk of it going wrong not even going to show up as a blip on our balance sheet? When it comes to cybersecurity, that's what you're actually dealing with. It's not a case of I saved. And of course, some of these small changes will make a difference. If you say I put users through phishing training, and we know that every year 12% of my users get phished, this is the average cost of the business, even in IT training and user potential data loss, and I put them through training, and now I've got it down to 6%. That's a really easy thing to say. So you can say, I want to get phishing training for my users because of this. That's not what I think the conversation should be about. I think the conversation should be about if tomorrow morning when we come in and every single device in this organization, whether it's a hospital or an airport or a bank or a dental office or a car dealership, cannot use their computers. And it's going to take us 2 months to get that system back up and running. And all of our data is published on the internet. Are you willing to accept that risk? And I think when you turn it into a financial risk of it could cost $1 million, for a board of a large company, $1 million is a rounding error. It's irrelevant. When you turn it into this is going to fail our business, that is what changes the conversation. And I always say when you're deciding to gamble on something, if I said to you today, would you put $100 on red or black at 10-1 odds? You'd be a fool not to, because your return, you've won the return. You might lose $100, but if you win, you've won $900 or whatever the math is, close. But if I said to you, put your house on red or black, and I'll give you 4 houses or 10 houses in return, you'd be a fool to put your house on red or black, because you can't sustain that loss, or maybe you can, but it's going to be really, really painful. And that's how we should be thinking about cybersecurity in a business. It's not about, I'm going to have a 4% reduction in staff breaches, which could result in a $200,000 reduction in lawsuits. The conversation should be about, are we going to survive as a business? And if we do survive, are we talking about such detrimental losses? It's killing our shareholders, it's killing our investors, it's killing our employees. We're going to fire people, and that's the conversation we should be having, because that's the reality of it. If you've ever dealt with a ransomware attack that involves every single machine being encrypted, all of the data being exfiltrated, all of your IP on the internet available for your competitors to buy, not comprehensible. And I don't think that's we shouldn't be talking about ROI. Of course, we have all those reports. Forrester does reports on ThreatLocker on ROI. I think it's the wrong conversation.
Yeah, completely agree. I love the analogy of the house, and that's a great way to look at it. And at the end of the day, first and foremost, they should be thinking about their employees and protecting them and their jobs and well-being. So, no, completely understand. Another question: how do you strike the balance between presenting cybersecurity as a compliance requirement versus a strategic enabler of business resilience when seeking board approval for funding? Raluca, do you want to answer that one first?
Sure. Although I feel like we've spoken about this quite a little bit, right? Boards like facts, and like you said as well, they're not stupid. They know what they're doing, right? And they want to know, first of all, what the risk is, what the worst outcome is for the business, and how they can avoid that. So I do feel like CEOs, CISOs, and CIOs, they need to present the facts in a digestible way, in a pragmatic and also very objective way to the board, in order to move the needle a little bit, right? And how do you move that needle? Well, you have to understand what your current posture is. You have to understand where you are right now. And you have to also be open to the things that you're not doing, that you should be doing well, and present that data to the board factually. And look, boards and executive management, they'll tell you what they want to hear from you, but they will also be open to hearing your perspective, because you're there, in the weeds, and you understand. And it's a matter of speaking their language. And in most cases, their language is very financially focused, pragmatic, simple, and business risk focused. So you definitely can't go with too much technical data, but you do have to present the facts objectively, and also understand how to present your current posture, whether that's good or bad, and showcase where you want to be in order to improve that. I think having clarity, and using that sort of language can help massively.
Definitely. Look, with 5 minutes left, maybe
Can I
just
just add something to that, Edward, as
oh,
well?
absolutely.
Yeah, so look, I saw a great slide once, and it was a guy on a motorcycle with a helmet on, completely naked, and it said, "This guy's compliant." And 20 to 30% at most of your cybersecurity requirements are going to be required by compliance, even if you're in a regulated environment. So if you're selling to the DoD, the MOD, if you're selling into healthcare, 20 to 30% of what you need to do to secure your environment is going to be required by compliance. For an IT professional, for a security professional trying to get money, that is the easiest 20 to 30% in the world, because the directors of the company are legally required to perform that action to not get sued by the government. And it's a very, very, very easy math decision. That's not your hardest part. You can lean towards compliance to help you sell. But what you should be doing is that should be the easiest thing. The 70% is the harder. 70 to 80% of the stuff that isn't going to be required by whatever framework you fall into. And most people don't fall into NIST or CIS, unfortunately, unless they're selling to the DoD. You need to, unfortunately, sell on the real risks of the business. And compliance is always going to be 5 years behind at best.
Definitely. So have you ever failed to get funding, and what lessons have you learned from that, Danny?
Well, I mean, I'm a CEO now, so for me to fail to get funding would be really, really extreme. But I think in my positions in IT, and positions as customers where the customers have failed. Yes. So I remember pitching to a healthcare group on behalf of a customer, telling them this is why you need this, and they failed to get funding. And um, I think the one lesson I learned is sometimes you just can't do anything. And if I was the CISO of that company, I would resign. Like that's honestly, if I'm the CISO and I'm being refused because your name as a CISO is it lives and dies with breaches. And so I would walk out the door and say, okay, you can go somewhere else to find someone who will put their name on this. I think I've not really failed in my own environment, but I think I failed where customers have asked me to come in, partners have asked me to come in and say, look, we're trying. I remember pitching to a board of surgeons, and the problem is the board of surgeons did not understand that computers were an important part for the hospital. The whole hospital board was ran by surgeons, and I couldn't convince them, and the customer couldn't convince them, the partner couldn't convince them. So you do fail, and I don't know if I managed to learn a lesson other than, we did everything we could. We showed compliance reasons. I mean, they were just willing to ignore compliance requirements. They were willing to ignore security compliance because they didn't see, as far as they were concerned, when they started this clinic or hospital, whatever it was a medical facility 40, 50 years ago, the same board members nearly, they didn't have computers and they functioned just fine. So they didn't see a value in technology. And you can't, in that case, the only thing I tried to do was say, why don't we bring in your team to show them how often they use technology on a day-to-day basis? But they didn't want to discuss it.
So with 2 minutes left, if you both can just give one practical tip to CISOs on helping them with that board conversation or securing funding, that'd be great. Raluca, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, my first tip is to remind them you're not alone in this. Do rely on your vendors, right? And I can speak from the perspective of a supplier. We help our customers quite a lot with those, metrics and even conversations and even reports. Get as much help as you can from your vendors. They often have a lot of security insights about your environment that can help you with that conversation. Secondly, learn how to speak the language of the board. Be pragmatic and learn how to have that financial objective conversation as well. And then thirdly, be confident in your abilities to explain exactly what the business needs and explain, well, not necessarily explain, but there's a reason you're in that role, and you obviously want and have the company's best interests at heart. And I think a lot of confidence helps in that area. Because look, I know we're talking a lot here about boards and they understand, but I have met a lot of CISOs that are just simply not confident enough to have that conversation. And at times they're being dismissed as well. So this is unfortunately the reality of the situation. So be confident, get support, speak the language, and have a plan. Show that you have a plan.
Okay, I would say CISOs should be leaders. Leaders lead. Leaders don't walk into a room and say, "I would like this and I think this." They go into a room and they say, "We have these weaknesses. This is how we're going to address them. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what I need resolved from the board." And that's how I would approach it. I think if you are a leader in any department, that's how it should be, and be prepared to answer any question that they're going to have and make sure you understand what you're asking for. Because if you go in and say, I need to block untrusted software, I need to implement a web control solution that does this, I need to implement this patch management system to do this, and they say, why do we need this? What does it do? How's it going to stop ransomware? And you go, I don't know, I have to come back to you on that. You you've automatically lost. But I would say be confident, lead, and avoid going in saying, can I please have this and do this? It's simple. This is our problems. These are our risks. This is how I'm going to address them. This is what it costs. If you go in stuttering, you're less likely to get what you need.
Brilliant. Look, if anyone has any additional questions or would like a board discussion around cybersecurity, feel free to reach out to SmartTech or ThreatLocker directly. As a bonus, SmartTech's flagship event, Zero Day Con, is taking place on April the 29th. So if you register and attend any SmartTech event throughout the remainder of October's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, you'll be entered into a draw to win a free ticket to Zero Day Con worth over €300. Thank you so much, Raluca and Danny. That was really insightful. And thank you everyone for attending.